Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, thank you. It's usually not call and response. And applause from Sal, thank you. My name is Carrie, and I am part of the programming team here at the library, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our program on the state of journalism in partnership with 2026 Pulitzer Prize-winning news outlet, CT Mirror. Yes, I was waiting for that. Tonight is the first in a series of conversations at the library in collaboration with CT Mirror. The next event is Monday, July 27th, when we'll be taking a look back at the Supreme Court in 2026. So mark your calendars. Yeah, it should be a lot of information in that one. Launched in 2010, the Connecticut Mirror is the state's trusted source for in-depth news and reporting on public policy, government, and politics, with a mission to produce original, in-depth, nonpartisan journalism that informs Connecticut residents about the impact of public policy, holding government accountable, and engaging and amplifying diverse voices and perspectives. Tonight's panel features Dick Tofel and Marie Shanahan in conversation with CT Mirror event host John Dankosky. A well-known and highly regarded radio personality and journalist, John moderates the In the Room series and other events for CT Mirror. John also serves as editorial director for the national radio show and podcast Science Friday. For 25 years, he worked at CT Public, where he founded the talk shows Where We Live and The Wheelhouse, and the New England News Collaborative. Please join me in welcoming John Dankosky, who will introduce our panelists this evening.
Hi, folks. This is a beautiful space. This is the first time I've been here since you guys zhuzhed this up. This is a great place to be, so thank you for welcoming us. It's our first event in this new series with the Westport Library. Thank you to the team here for helping to put this together and for broadcasting tonight's conversation about journalism. It's the first such event we've had since the Connecticut Mirror won a Pulitzer Prize, as you just heard. I'm going to say this like 5 more times tonight. We will talk about that a little bit later. I'd also like to thank Connecticut Mirror board members Beth Bai, Joe McGee, Bilal Saku, and Lou Golden for joining us tonight. Thanks to the people who are joining our live stream from far and wide. This is the part where I get to say hi to my parents in South Carolina. And for those in attendance here in Westport, you have a note card that you can write some questions for our panelists if you'd like. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We've got some people who will collect them about halfway through our program, so make sure you get some in. We'll try to get to a few later on in the program. I'm joined by 2 veteran journalists who will share some insights about the state of journalism at this point in American history. Marie Shanahan is an associate professor and head of the Department of Journalism at the University of Connecticut. She specializes in digital journalism and interactive communications. She worked as a reporter, editor, and digital news producer for more than 20 years. She's the author of Journalism, Online Comments, and the Future of Public Discourse. She's the recipient of a 2022 Fulbright Fellowship. Marie, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
And Dick Tofel is the founding general manager and first employee of ProPublica. He was the president there from 2013 till 2021. He was formerly the assistant publisher of the Wall Street Journal, and he was responsible for its international editions and U.S. special editions earlier, and assistant managing editor of the paper. He also served in executive roles at Dow Jones and Company. He is the author of the newsletter, Second Rough Draft. Dick, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And by the way, for those of you who are used to me on public radio, we were talking just a moment ago about diverse voices. The diversity of my voice is such that you may hear a little bit of grumbling just because of the way it works these days. So my apologies. I'll try to speak as clearly as possible for you. As we get ready next week for the 250th birthday of America, it feels like a kind of a fitting time to review the state of journalism. It's one of the institutions that is central to our founding principles. Did the two of you see the video interview that Scott Pelley did after he left 60 Minutes or was fired from 60 Minutes? He was talking about what journalism means to America, and he said, you cannot have democracy without journalism. I guess I'm wondering, just to start, if the two of you have been thinking about the role of our business, what we do at this particular time in American history. Marie?
Well, I would say that I think about that a lot since I'm teaching college students at the University of Connecticut, and press freedom, if you think about holding government accountable, holding those in power accountable, doing the public's business in front of the public, all of those things are so important. And at this point in time, when you see it slipping so quickly, you know, I'm reminded about Maria Ressa, who was the Nobel Prize laureate from the Philippines, witnessed that same thing happen in the Philippines also very quickly. And she appeared in Connecticut a couple of years ago, and I got to meet with her when she received an award. And she really talked about how we are responsible for that we are the ones that can collectively fight back against it, right? That the power lies within us to not have it be taken away. And it's that idea of, you know, for me, I often talk about local journalism, the importance of teaching journalism, understanding what journalism means in American society, because it is civic education, right? It is participation, it is free speech, it is freedom of the press. And, you know, I read it's funny, John, because I was thinking about, you know, as I was preparing for this, I saw a study even today that is easier for all of us to find news elsewhere, like national news somewhere else in the world, than it is for you to find news about your own neighborhood, right? And that's true for most of us. In the cities and towns that we live in, there's so little local news, but you can find a million stories about what happened in Washington today. And that's not holding everyone accountable, right? Yes. And that's also not connecting us, you know, as Americans, as in a community.
But just to follow up, though, you're talking about fighting back against this tide. I think many people feel as though they can't fight back. If you have oligarchs running the major newspapers, if you have administrations saying we don't want to have press freedom as we had before, I think people could rightly say, I mean, who do I fight back against? What do I do? What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, at UConn, we try to teach our students, you know, we teach them the history of the press, you know, the press in America, and we show them sort of, and the history of the press is not perfect, right? And you think about how trust in the media has gone away, but now there's also new ways. There's new products. There's entrepreneurialism. There's nonprofit journalism. I mean, I think Dick can talk about coming up with something new that is a part of fighting back and realizing that you do have that power. I think there's a lack of understanding of what you still have the right to, right, as a citizen when it comes to free speech and freedom of the press, and that you should be exercising that freedom, all of us, not just, you know, waiting for some hero to do it. We all have to do it.
So, Dick, how have you been reflecting on the state of journalism right now at this point in American history?
Just reflect on it generally, John?
Yeah, I mean, you must often think about it.
I mean, honestly, I do think about it a lot, and I agree with everything that's just been said. I'm, I guess, maybe a little bit more optimistic about it. I think there is some chance that, in a funny way, as with Watergate, which was a very dark moment, that we could conceivably look back on this at the national level as one of the heydays of journalism. I think there's a lot of great journalism being done at the national level. I think it's making a big difference. For people who say it makes no difference, I mean, the thing I would point out to you is, according to basically every poll that I see, about a third of the people who voted for the president 20 months ago have changed their minds. That didn't fall from the sky, right? It came from what they were finding out and what they have come to know, and in many cases, they found that out from journalism. So, you know, obviously there are things to be worried about, and the story's not yet written, but I think there are real reasons for optimism at the national level. I also agree with what was said about the local level, where I think the prospects are more frightening, and I think the value of something like the Mirror is enormous. The fact that, you know, look at what the Pulitzer Prize coverage was about. It was about, how many people here know the answer to this? So a bunch of you don't, so I'm gonna take a minute. It was about abuses of towing in this state, and people who lost their vehicles and lost their personal property and lost their ability to get to work, and real deep impact on the lives of quite a few people because of serious systemic problems in the way that towing was regulated and not in this state. And that coverage led to two waves of substantial reform by the legislature that have changed that and are going to make the towing regime in this state more humane, more responsive to people. That's what the news business can do. It's what it can do locally. You know, towing in Connecticut is probably not as cosmically important as the Iran war, unless it's your car and your job and your livelihood, and then it may be more so. But the challenge is that local organizations around the country do not have the resources that they need, by and large, and almost everywhere, including here, they don't have the resources that they used to have, or that the previous incumbents, the legacy players, had once upon a time. That worries me more. Where it worries me the most, and then I'll stop for a second, is in places where people have no money. So, you know, this is a relatively prosperous community, and it's a relatively prosperous state. And so I think you have the potential to build it back here if you'll all, you know, do what you can to support it. And I think that's happening in places in this country, both in neighborhoods and in entire areas where there is very little money. That's where I would say journalism is in the biggest trouble at the moment.
I want to go back to something you said, though, about the potential for heyday of journalism, because I think examples like this show what local reporting can do and some great national reporting can do, because the Mirror worked with ProPublica on this investigation. The thing about Watergate is that was a time at which, if you had some smart reporters and editors working very hard to uncover injustice, something that people were doing that they should not have been doing, and you draw it to people's attention, then something would change. One thing that has changed in America is, what if the people who do those things just say, yeah, I did them. What are you going to do about it? I think that feels like the fundamental difference between now and the early 1970s.
Look, it is a difference, right? And I wouldn't try to pretend that it's not. But anybody can tell me off the top of their head how long from the Watergate break-in to Nixon's resignation? 26 months. It was not a week. It was not even a number of months. It was 26 months. 5 months after the Watergate break-in, we had an election in this country, and Nixon got 60% of the vote. And most of the stories that won the Pulitzer Prize for Woodward and Bernstein had already been published. So, you know, we don't quite remember it, I think, the way it really was, right? The president's been back in office for 20 months, right, I think? Is that what it is? Not even 17 months, 18 months?
It's hard to keep track.
This was 26 months. So, you know, let's see. We're going to have a general election in this country in 4 months. You know, I wouldn't pretend to know how it's going to come out, but it seems to be moving in a direction that would suggest that it will be a significant judgment in less time than that.
I think it also speaks to, John, like the idea that we're all not, you know, drinking from the same bucket when it comes to the news that you're getting, right? So you think about people's pathways to news, everyone's is different because there's so many choices. Even what you consider news, what you decide to pay attention to, it's not gonna be the same for everyone because that doesn't exist anymore, where there's, you know, one newspaper in your town, 2 TV stations, a radio station. Now there's a million choices, and people can certainly not see that piece of news. They are, because it didn't come into their feed that day, if they're not searching for it because people are exhausted. There's a lot of news avoidance that's out there. So I think there's also that challenge in the sense that, you know, I think about this as a board member of the Connecticut Mirror. How do I make sure that this story gets in front of the people who need to see it, who would benefit from seeing it, and then obviously expand that as far out as I possibly can. And what's wonderful about this story, and part of the reason why ProPublica and the Mirror got the Pulitzer, is because the people who needed to see it were those policymakers, and they made a change as a result of knowing what was wrong.
To talk more about those pathways to the news and what you've learned about that, because as you say, everyone gets the news differently. People of different ages get the news differently. People in different parts of the country or the state get the news differently. What have you learned about this and how it's changed? Yeah,
I mean, there's a report that just came out in the past week or so, you know, the Reuters annual digital news report. And each year they poll Americans and people in like 60 other countries, and they see where are people actually getting their information, how they feel about trust in the news. And the things that sort of popped out this year were that the most growth in the news is coming from people choosing to do social media, video channels, and aggregators and AI. Those were where people are getting their information from. And what's interesting is like none of those are like the news website of the New York Times or the news website of the Connecticut Mirror. It's going through some other intermediary in order to get the news. So, you know, I was telling Dick and John just earlier that we have a journalism camp happening this week at UConn, high school students. So I pop into the classroom just to say hello, and I always ask the students, hey, you know, how do you get your news? Where do you find out stuff? And pretty much 95% of that classroom, they all said TikTok. They all start on TikTok. Now, there was a very smart young woman in the front who was talking, and she said, I start at TikTok and I see stuff, but then I go and check and see if it's real. So she kind of uses it like the police scanner, like, you know, where you start there, but you know it's not. Maybe it's just banter, and you have to check to make sure it's real. So, I mean, that's one element of like news literacy. But I have to think about that, like, if that's where they're starting, is TikTok, then how do we make sure that the Mirror stories on TikTok, if that's the audience that needs to reach it? Or do we not need to worry about that?
So then how do you view this, Dick? I mean, because this idea of the news coming in from all these different pathways, depending on who you are, depending on your age, you want this story to get in front of people. So that's the challenge. How do you figure that out from a business model perspective?
I think part of it is in the commonplace phrase that's thrown around the business these days is that you have to meet people where they are, and I think that's absolutely right. There needs to be more video versions of what is being done. There need to be TikTok versions. There also, you know, not everyone in this country is young. In fact, most people, you know, if we're defining young as in your teens and 20s, most people are not. And so you want to continue to serve people who develop news habits that are otherwise. It is also, I think, possible that people's habits will evolve. I will never forget one of my first days as an executive at the Wall Street Journal, one of my first executive meetings. I went in and they made this elaborate presentation. This is about 30 years ago, and maybe 35 years ago. And they said, there's this really big problem. We have absolutely almost nobody under 35 reading the Wall Street Journal. And so it's going to turn out that implicitly what the argument was that in 30 years, no one will be reading the Wall Street Journal. And that's a disaster. And the CFO of the company was an old, grizzled guy, took me aside as we were leaving the meeting, and he said, so I just want to tell you, because I know this is one of your first meetings, he said, nobody under 35 has ever read the Wall Street Journal. And what happens is people end up in certain kinds of jobs where somebody says to them, you know, you'd better read the Wall Street Journal. And the largest circulation newspaper in the United States in print in 1995 was the Wall Street Journal, and the largest circulation newspaper in print in the United States today is the Wall Street Journal. And, you know, the Journal has literally a larger audience, as almost every leading news organization does, a larger audience than it has ever had. So these are real things. Things are changing. Just a quick show of hands. Does anybody here get their news from an AI chatbot? Yeah, nobody. The survey, same survey, said that this is now 5% of the people. Yeah. There are some people who think that in some period of 10 or 15 years, everyone is going to get their news through an AI chatbot. Maybe. I doubt it will be everybody. It will be more than nobody. You've got to stay sufficiently flexible and engaged to adapt to that.
But you don't have to get it directly from an AI chatbot to be getting your news from AI. It's currently scrubbing the Connecticut Mirror and the Hartford Courant and the Wall Street Journal and giving you a synopsis, Marie, at the top, which is a very different product than sending people directly to the Connecticut Mirror website. Sometimes these little synopses have hallucinations and they give me information that aren't quite right.
That's right.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering how we account for that as we try to continue to make news in our publications, right. But people are reading this thing at the top that it just got ripped off by a computer.
Right, because it's ease of use, right? I didn't have to do the work of reading the whole article because it's summarized.
I didn't have to do the work of just clicking one more time to get to ctmirror.org.
Yes, and I think that is an educational thing. That is news literacy, right? That is education that all of us in society, you know, from my 12-year-old daughter to my dad who's 83, all of us need to know this is the information landscape. It is filled with stuff that is not true. Filled with stuff that is not true, that is trying to trick you, that is just misinformation. And one thing that I said to those high school students when they were telling me like the big news source story that they saw on TikTok, and I said, well, how do you know that's true? And did you share it? Did you share it before you knew it was true? Because then, if it wasn't true, you just became a cog in the misinformation machine, right? And I don't like getting duped, because, you know, I'm a journalist. That's, I don't like that at all. It makes me angry. So I'm not going to take whatever that is at face value. So yes, maybe it did summarize it, but I think all of us, teachers, parents, we need to let people know you can't trust that, and you got to go deeper, and that shouldn't be your only source.
Yeah,
of course. Go ahead.
Say one thing, though. I think that there clearly is a lot of disinformation out there. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese and frequently the President of the United States are saying things that are completely and that they know are not true, and that is a very serious problem. Yes. I actually think that the problems with AI being wrong are very transitory, are declining, and are not going to last. Those companies are in business to make money.
Sure.
No one is going to pay them to serve them up fake news, just like no one has paid news organizations ever to serve up fake news. It's not a good business strategy to get it wrong. It has never been. And I actually think that, you know, having your eye on that ball, you will miss it. It is, there are problems with AI. The biggest problem, I think, at the moment is, how many people here use AI for any purpose? Yeah, okay, excellent, wow, great. Here's what I observe, that the bias in the system, and this I worry about becoming permanent, is that it is trying to give you the cheapest answer from the provider's point of view. The answer that uses up, as they say in the business, the least compute. So it says to you, here are some things. And frequently I find if you do a search and say, give me a list of all of X, it'll give you a list. And then if you say, I think there are more, it will say, actually, you're right. There are more, and then it'll give you a longer list. That is an inherent bias that they've put in there because they make more money if you use less of their computing time, and if you'll take the surface answer, which is not the wrong answer, it's just the partial answer.
But this is what I was going to say. I mean, I appreciate, Marie, the idea that we have to fight back. The problem with the fighting back is just like they're in the business of giving you the least possible compute for the simplest answer, they will also see that we're fighting back and checking sources to go elsewhere, and they will make it as hard as possible to get information any place other than just the place they want you to get it. Right. That's the problem with the fight back. Because that's the business model, right? They want you in that funnel, and they've got the money to keep you there.
Right, and you're not paying for anything, right? It's free. Do you get what you pay for? Right? I mean, think about it. In terms of quality, you know, they'll hand you lots of stuff that is not true because it's free and easy to make, right? And if you settle for that, then that's exactly what you're gonna get. But I think we all need to be, like, to want a little more. And it's that idea of like, I know that if I pay for that, it better be good, or I'm not gonna give them my money next time.
But before I get to my next thing, we actually, if you have questions, we've got some folks who are going to go around and collect some of the cards here. If you have them already, you'll see Celia over here and Gabby's over here. So please put up your hand and get us some questions so that we can get them there. We actually got a question from a reader in advance that says, how can journalism reap the benefits of AI while maintaining actual human reporting and enforcing true journalistic principles? This is the other part, Dick, of AI, is what does the journalism business do to actually use it to help do our work?
So people are in journalism now, I think, are extensively using AI for internal processes, for research, for data analysis. That's good. And I suspect for a lot of the ways that the folks here are using it. I think the thing that is not being done enough is to use it to develop new products. I don't completely know what that means, honestly, having said it, but I'll give you two examples. It is almost certainly possible at this point to produce complete, in near real time, foreign language versions of products that are being already produced in English at very, very low cost. You know, very, very cursory copy editing to make sure the translations are correct. Nobody's doing that, really, at mass level. And I hope people will start, especially in communities, local or national, where there are substantial audiences to be had in other languages. The second thing is AI has a capacity that has heretofore been limited to a very small number of people, which is the ability to rewrite things at different reading levels. You know, most of the things that probably most of the people here like to read are written at 11th, 12th, 13th grade reading level. If you rewrote those things systematically at an 8th grade level, you're opening yourself up to a much wider audience. You're opening yourself up conceivably to getting people in the habit younger, and to people who never really get to 11th, 12th, and 13th grade reading levels. So those are two simple things. I think there are also new products that simply haven't been conceived of. There is almost certainly new hardware coming. You know, in some ways, we are in a period, a moment that's a little bit like the beginning of the internet about 30 years ago. And the iPhone hasn't been invented yet. It will be. There will be AI-based hardware that will be transformative.
How are you thinking about this with your students,
well,
too?
That's the thing. So, John, I can give you some examples that we've heard. So we have a faculty member in UConn journalism. His specialty is actually looking at AI. And some of the things that he's told me about, for example, there is a newsroom out in Ohio which sends out their journalists to do reporting. Because humans have to go see things in person, talk to people, do the hard work of the reporting. They send back what they collected, and AI does the first draft. So they don't write it. But then there's an editor who is there, who then checks the story to make sure that it's accurate. They also show it to the reporter, and then when that process is done, it's there. I was talking to a UConn journalism grad who now works for Politico, and she's a White House reporter, and I was telling her about this. And she said, sometimes, you know, I spend all day reporting, and the reason I got into journalism is because I love to write. But I could see myself giving that up if it meant that I had more time to do more reporting, because that's the thing that she can do as a really good human being journalist. And so it's interesting to think about how to sort of farm out certain aspects of journalism, but again, only if it's accurate, only if it's checked, only if the public will accept that, right? And it was another board member of the CT Mirror who sent me a story from the Boston Globe about a new organization up there that uses AI to get the transcripts of all of the local meetings that nobody wants to go to, all right? Coalesces them, spits out stories written by AI, offered it for free for a while, now it's behind a paywall.
It's behind a paywall.
Now it's behind a paywall.
Because people like it?
Because I guess people will pay for that because there's no other local coverage. There's not a reporter actually out there coalescing what's happened at those meetings, so the AI does it, and apparently that's good enough.
Doesn't that...
That concerns me.
Doesn't that scare the hell out of you, Dick?
Honestly, not. I mean, it doesn't, and for one reason. First of all, that will be a capability that everybody who wants it will have soon.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I don't think it's going to stay behind the paywall for very long. What I worry about, honestly, is, you know, my wife and I drove up here from New York, and we don't come to Westport very often, so we used, you know, as I suspect you all do, to go to an unfamiliar place, GPS. I am old enough to remember when we did not have this, and we actually were able to get from New York to Westport. I'm not sure we could do it anymore, having spent the last 30 years dependent on it. And people who understand neuroscience better than I do say that that is a real problem, actually, that our ability to get from New York to Westport is sort of done because we have surrendered it to the machine. I don't really think that's a big loss, but I do think surrendering writing to the machine, if your job is writing, is a really bad idea. I don't think it's a really bad idea if you're, you know, if your job does not involve writing, but sometimes you have to send somebody a memo. I don't think that's that big a deal to let AI write the first draft. But if you are a writer, in part, it would be good if you remembered and continued to sharpen your skills in writing. And so I think, and there will be analogies to this, and I think we're all going to have to be really careful about that, and that does scare me.
And I think that would be the worry as you're teaching young journalists, right? Can they write a story?
Yeah.
Because they've never had to.
Yes, and that's the worry, is that, and this is true within, academia and education right now, that students have figured out they can get the AI to write it for them, which means they will never learn to write, which means they essentially are unskilled. It's not like they de-skilled. They never learned it in the first place. They're actually unskilled, and that's not good. If I use the AI, I know how to write. So when I read it and it sounds really weird, I'm gonna know that that doesn't sound like my voice, and it's just really weird. And let me tell you, I do see they submit their assignments, and sometimes something is written like super strange, and I grade it accordingly because it's really strange and not how someone would write or talk. And so the student hopefully recognizes that maybe that AI didn't help you. But that is a serious concern, because if there are, again, if humans stop doing certain things, then you're right, we're gonna atrophy that part of our brain.
Yeah. Like, I hope we have airplane pilots who can still read a map. That, if you're in that business, that would be good.
We have some great questions from folks, so I'm going to pepper in some of these and try to get to as many as possible. This is a good one. There's a long history of media dating back to the 1700s that was very partisan and not objective. What makes today so different and more worrisome? I like that there's a little bit of a position on the end of that, but it's a very good question there. Is it so different than those early days of newspapers that were very, very partisan, for those of you who know?
Yes, I mean, the partisan pamphlets and them calling each other terrible names and everything else, yes, that has already happened in our history. I think what's happened today, though, is it's all, because we have the internet, it's all supercharged, right? So it can spread much more quicker. You can find your echo chamber faster, and you never have to be potentially exposed to anything else, because we have enough information out there that you can cut yourself off from it. We have a very polarized society, and obviously that stokes the more the fire of it. But maybe it's, look at Dick has a sense of hope that we'll come out of it.
I do think it's really important to draw an important distinction between opinion journalism and news journalism. Mm-hmm. And there are the opinion journalism is enormously polarized. Very much in the same way it was in the late 18th century, in the period we're all going to be celebrating next week. And the other thing that has happened, which is very different from the late 18th century, is that anybody with a pretty simple device that we all have can potentially reach everybody at no cost. And so the barriers to entry, as they say in the economics business, in opinion journalism have fallen to zero, and so we are awash in opinion journalism. And I am in part responsible for this myself. I'm doing my little bit to make this problem worse by writing an opinion column. But that is different from reported news, which is hard. It is a skill. Not that many people attempt to do it. And the barriers to entry to that are still considerable, even though the distribution of it is easier.
But because we're part of the business, and because the people who are here, who consume it in the way that they do, understand real journalism versus opinion, I think we have a different view of it. What has happened, I think, more than ever during my career in the last couple of years is that very hard news is easily lampooned as just opinion. It's just more fake news. And I think the more that takes hold in people's minds, there is a worry that there's no difference. If someone does a 5-part series on abuses in state government, that's the same thing as Dick Tofel just writing his opinion on something, because we keep hearing that over and over again from so many people.
I don't think most people believe that.
Yeah.
I really don't. That's why the towing laws got changed, right? The towing industry, I'm sure, was really unhappy about this. The system had been set up so that they could make the most money. They didn't roll over. they got rolled over by the facts that were brought to people's attention and that elected representatives said, this is a problem. I still think people are persuadable by the facts. I think most people consider them. If you think that everybody else pays no attention to the facts, but you still do, it is possible that you might be wrong about everybody else.
But I mean, to your point, John, I will say, the effect of disinformation overall is for you to trust nothing. Mm-hmm. That means that it has been effective, right? And so if we all trust nothing, then we believe nothing, and that they can do whatever they want and they can get away with it, right? So be mindful of not becoming a cog in that disinformation machine, right? And that you check multiple sources, right? It's gotta be more than just the easiest thing that you can find for free.
Here's a question. Of the 5 local newspapers I worked for at the beginning of my career, 4 no longer exist. How do we bring back local news? Is it simply a matter of convincing people to pay for news? I'll let you go.
Want me to do this?
Go. Yeah, go ahead.
The shortest answer is yes.
Yes.
So there's still some advertising revenue for news, but frankly, there's going to be less. There is less, and there's going to be even less. Almost all the advertising revenue in this country of all sorts now goes to a couple, or actually 3 very large companies, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. It is conceivable that AI will evolve in such a way that there will be 5, or maybe the 5 will collapse into 3 or 4 or whatever. But there's not going to be a lot of advertising revenue for news. There is, however, you're paying for something that asks you to subscribe, or you're donating to something that you read, or if you have more money than that, you're making a major gift the same way you would to the library, or to your church, or to your university, or to your symphony. That's how it happens. We have supported in this country performing arts organizations and religious institutions and private hospitals for centuries. News has changed as a business. It's going to be on the list with all those things. And if you want to have them the way you have understood since you were little, and you first started to ask about how do we have ballet or symphony or a history museum or the church, the same answer is, how are we going to have local news in this country? That's the answer.
But you've also named a series of institutions that are themselves struggling to survive currently, and I think part of it is the model that people have for paying for their content, and I hate that word so much, but it is what people are paying for. You have a Netflix subscription, you have an HBO Max subscription, and you get a whole bunch of things, and you know that I'm going to pay $20 a month or $10 a month for it. If your local newspaper, Marie, is asking you to pay $5 a month, $10 a month, but then you have other sources of news, maybe international sources, and you pay for those, and you pay for those, and you pay, it starts to get incredibly expensive to support the news. Is there a different model than the model of, you want the New York Times, you got to pay $22.75 or else you don't get it? Is there something different for that? Because it gets very unaffordable for a lot of people.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, obviously, you will pay and give your attention to something that you value, right? That's the thing. The Mirror, anyone can go on CT Mirror today, and they can read it because it's made, it's free. It's made available, like public radio, right?
Like public radio.
Right, like public radio. So you can access it, and because I loved listening to John Dankosky when I was driving to work, I always made my donation to WNPR every year.
Thank you for listening.
Because I valued it, that I did not want it to go away. There's another study that just came out. I was telling my friend Mike Dinan, who's here, who's the editor of newcanaanite.com, a wonderful hyper-local news site that has lasted quite some time. He's got great engagement, about how the study just came out that said that communities that have local news, people that live in those communities are less lonely. So maybe that's a selling point, because it means that you are finding out about your neighbors, that you know that there's an event tonight at the Westport Library, that you know that there's a festival later, even that there's going to be a protest, on the corner of, Main and Elm Street, that you then will participate in that. Just having that, it's that whole idea of like, do you like writing humanistic feature stories? So, students like writing those kinds of stories. We don't have those kinds of stories, but those are what connect people to their neighbors and say, okay, that's my neighbor. That's the person that I have in my town. We don't have that kind of news anymore. And it's funny, when I read that today, I thought to myself, I should start like a features magazine online just for my town. And I can just write feature stories about the kids in town, softball,
Worst business idea ever, yes.
But it made me think that if I can tap into the sense that people do not, we're all so isolated looking at our screens, that it gives me an opportunity to actually come out. All of you came out tonight, so great, watching it online. That maybe that's a good selling point for local news.
Well, and
then if you value it, you'll pay for it.
Well, I think the other thing too, Dick, is I know some of the same, when Pew does these surveys each year about how much trust do people have in national news, it keeps going down and down. It's almost 50-50, right? People don't really trust the national news. Local news, it's more like 70%. People trust local news more than they trust national news sources.
Yes, although I'm a little bit of a contrarian about this trust thing. I think trust in news is a lot like trust in the Congress. The polls are very clear. No one trusts the Congress. The Congress has like an approval rating of 10%. The lowest presidential approval rating, I mean, that's literally true. It's like 10 or 11%. The lowest presidential approval rating in American history is not below 25%. So the Congress every day is worse than anybody, worse than Nixon at the bottom, Carter at the bottom, George W. Bush at the bottom, Harry Truman at the bottom, Congress way down below it all the time. But when members of Congress run for re-election, over time, on average, they are reelected 85% of the time. Everyone, more or less, trusts their own congressman, although no one trusts the Congress. And the polls actually say that, if you look underneath it, say the same thing about the news. Nobody trusts the news business. Everybody trusts the news they choose to consume. Now, yes, that's even more true for local, because you actually frequently know those people. So you have even more reason to. But I suspect that very few of you are regularly choosing to consume a news source that you actively distrust, because why would you, right? So, and I think this is true for people who have very, very different views from your own. They too trust the news sources that they are choosing to consume. So I think that problem is not as well understood as it might be.
So here's the question. What if the only news that you can get about your town is from some local Facebook group, right? Where it's just people that are on Facebook who happen to live in town and feel like posting, that's where they share their information. I think that is true for a lot of communities.
Of course it is.
And so when you talk about, do I choose? Well, I do follow it, so I guess that was a choice. But I don't trust anything I see on there, because it's all obviously people's opinions.
But it depends on what you're looking for.
Exactly.
When is the parade?
Yes,
That's a good thing that you can find.
Right.
And you may trust them to be their opinions, right? I mean, you may find it interesting because you want to know what your neighbors are thinking.
I gotta move out of this town.
I actually frequently think that when I read those groups. My goodness, what have I done with my life? This is for you, Marie, because we brought this up a little bit, but someone was to ask, have we begun or will we begin to teach younger people, in quotes, I love that, how to take news more critically, so that we actually are more critical news users. How are we doing that right now?
So obviously, if you're a journalism major at the University of Connecticut, we hammer you with, what's newsworthy, what makes a decent news story. We don't let our students submit one source stories. They have to get multiple sources. They work at internships that challenge them, like at the Connecticut Mirror. So that is there. I recently got approved a new general education course at the University of Connecticut that is open to all majors, not just journalism majors, that is called news literacy. And that is exactly what I think everyone needs to learn. And using basically the ideas about like essences of, everyone should know a bit about journalism, because you learn about verification, you learn to question, you learn to make sure you have more than one source, how do you make sure that source is real? All of those things are very useful and very transferable skills, mind you, but useful for then when you become a member, you are a fully fledged member of society and you're past the TikTok stage and now you want to engage, you really want to know what's happening in your community with your congressman or your
You get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal,
Right,
exactly.
that you are thinking about, I know what actually makes good news. Because I see news stories done by professional news organizations or journalists that I like, and I'm like, that wasn't a great story. Like, that's got one source in it. It oversold in the headline. It's not what I want. But I know what to look for. So I think training everyone to have a better understanding of how to be really good news consumers. Because you know what? No one's going to come and save you, all right? They're not going to moderate Facebook in a way that then, that shows the best news. You saw what happened to Twitter. The internet is a free-for-all. You are responsible for your own information diet, right? And so you need to be a good critical thinker, which is what we teach in college. And we definitely teach that in journalism.
I want to ask you, Dick, about something that you actually wrote on your Substack just today, because we're talking a lot about the threats to journalism from external forces, but sometimes, the enemy is us. And you wrote about how the media covered the rise in oil, threats of like $150 a barrel oil. To talk about that and what it showed you about how many places are actually reporting the news that's not particularly helpful.
Yeah, so as if you can remember, back to 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, we were told by a lot of really smart people, oil analysts who for a living are supposed to know the answer to this question, that if the Strait of Hormuz was not open by April 1st, oil was going to go to $150. And if that happened, there would be catastrophic economic effects. And I think the last part is almost certainly true. If oil had gone to $150, as bad as things got, they would have been much, much worse. And then we were told that if the Strait of Hormuz remained closed till May 1st, oil would go to $150. And then, by the way, although I didn't put this in the article, we were told that if it was still closed until last week, at the beginning of the summer, that oil would go to $150. Well, oil peaked at $115, and the Strait of Hormuz is still not open in any meaningful way. And even, by the way, by the terms of the deal, may not be open until as late as July 17th. The Iranians would be in complete compliance with the deal if they opened the spigot all the way on July 17th. So the question is, why did we do this and what can we learn from it? What we can learn from it is, this is a thing that the press is not great at. We tend to take the most extreme claims more seriously, right? The fact that that gasoline went from $3 to $4 very, very quickly, as we all experienced, that's a big problem. We don't need to sit around going, oh my God, it may go to $5. I mean, that's true, it might, but we could focus on the $3 to $4 thing, which is a big problem, enough of a big problem. We could also say that analysts who've told us stuff like this, we're not gonna pay so much attention to next time. If you got it wrong in April, don't come talk to me in May about your next prediction, and I'm not gonna share your next prediction with my readers, listeners, viewers. So lessons like that, I think are important, and I think it is useful for those of us in the news business to look critically after any kind of major event. What did we do well and what did we do less well? And on this one, I thought we'd done less well, and so I thought it was worth talking about.
How do we, as someone writes here, how do we strengthen the economic viability, of local journalism? We've talked around this a little bit, but for both of you, I'd love to just hear a small plan that you have for making this work in a better way than relying on a few big supporters who have deep pockets, relying on people to give $30 or $40, and hopefully that's not rubbing up against other costs that they have in their household. What's a good model? I'll ask you first, Dick, but I'd love to hear from you.
I don't have a better plan than that, but I actually think that's a pretty good plan. We don't need everybody to care about the news, about local news, to have healthy local news. Not everybody cares about having art museums. In fact, most people don't. Not everybody cares about having particular religious denominations. Most people don't. Not everybody cares about particular private hospitals. Again, the vast majority of people do not. For those people who care about this, I think there are enough people, and I think there are signs of this emerging where there are resources in the aggregate. That is to say, where communities have enough money, that we can find enough people to step forward and say, I'm going to be part of it. If I've just got an average level of resources, I'm going to be a small part of it, but lots of small parts of it can add up. And if I'm particularly fortunate, then I'm going to be a bigger part of it. I think that, as I said, I don't have a better plan than that, but that doesn't worry me, again, in communities with resources, because I think this country has been really good at delivering a whole range of things for a long time. And what's changed in the last, especially the last 20 years, but people are becoming more and more aware of it, and I think you all are aware of it or you wouldn't be here tonight, is that the news is becoming one of those things. But go home and tell your neighbors who don't know that and who think the news is going to fall out of the sky that it used to fall out of the sky, but if you want local news, you know what? It turned out to be like art museums, and you're going to have to do something about it.
What do you think, Marie?
Well, I can talk about one small thing that we're doing at the University of Connecticut and in our role as the flagship, is that UConn Journalism has gotten together with the journalism programs at the other state universities, Central, Southern, some of the community colleges, and we have created what is called the Connecticut Student Journalism Collaborative. And what we do is the many journalism students that we teach, UConn having the largest population of them, we use our courses, our classes, our faculty who are professional journalists, and we have students cover local news. That local news that is not being covered anymore because the local news environment has shrunk. And we offer those stories, thank you. We offer the stories that are the best ones. Some students don't always earn an A, but the ones who do, we offer those stories. We have a platform, it's called CT Community News, and we offer those stories to our news partners. Our students have been published by WSHU here in Fairfield County, by Connecticut Public, a few by the Connecticut Mirror, by the Hartford Courant, and so we are very excited to be able to offer more local news as a teaching tool, as a learning experience, as part of workforce development. And we're lucky enough, we actually created it into a 501c3, and we are taking donations. So we are very excited to be able to show our students basically what they are learning can have an immediate effect to the public. And so we've grown, and we hope to keep growing. This is our second year, and I think we've published probably about 50 stories this year, which is great.
That is such a good, it's such a good place to I think end this conversation. I'll say, when we were putting this whole thing together, I don't know how many conversations I've moderated over the course of 35 years about the future of journalism. I've done this so many times, and this has honestly been the most hopeful one, and I didn't expect that tonight. So thank you both so much. Dick Tofel and Marie Shanahan, thank you so much for your expertise and all your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank our hosts, the Westport Library. I'd like to thank Celia Klotzer from the Connecticut Mirror, who produced this evening's event. Everyone at the Pulitzer Prize-winning Connecticut Mirror for helping to put this event together. Thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. On Monday, July 27th, as part of this journalism series in partnership with the Mirror, I'm going to be sitting down with the New York Times Supreme Court reporter Ann Marimo for a conversation about the court's major decisions from this past year. You can go to ctmirror.org/events for more information. While you're there at ctmirror.org, you're going to see a red donate button with a beating heart in the upper right-hand corner. It actually has a beating heart now, which is lovely. That's where you can support nonprofit journalism at the Mirror. You can support efforts like the Mirror, efforts like your local public radio station, and like your local public library, because that is what democracy, as we talked about at the start of this, is all about. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and please drive home safely.